just before the meeting. And I thought for a second there whether we...
Going through this thing, like all Jay Powell's questions that he's getting, and he's like, well, inflation is above target, so that's good. And it's like, this is insane, you know? Like, they have a target to destroy your purchasing power by 2% a year by design. I freaking love to just listen to the propaganda machine.
Parts of the labor force. We'd also tend to look...
This is the real president, by the way. Jerome Powell is the real president of the United States.
Strong employment report and
got the reports
to prior readings.
Got the reports from the academics.
No increase in labor supply. And the Friday after that, we got the CPI.
Yeah,
which was
the
very
Fed's
high.
screwed.
We needed to look at speeding up the taper, and we went to work on that. So that's really what happened. It was essentially higher inflation and faster, turns out much faster progress in the labor market. Really what's happening is the unemployment rate is catching up. Seems to be catching up with a lot of the other readings of a tight labor
so
market.
So much BS. And so essentially we have an organization that is allowed in one word or another to print money. They don't directly print it because they're not the treasury, but basically they can encourage the federal government to issue debt and they can buy it. And then they own the debt and they can issue Federal Reserve notes. If you look at your fake currency in your wallet, it'll say, for all debts, public and private, Federal Reserve note. It's backed up by the Federal Reserve. It's crazy because we don't elect these people. The president typically will elect the president of the Federal Reserve. There's, I believe, 8 different banks, federal banks. There's like one in Houston. There's one in Atlanta. There's one in New York, and so there's these different regional banks of the Federal Reserve. And at these institutions, large, big buildings, beautiful marble buildings, they'll employ a lot of doctorate academics, people that got an economics degree, doctorate in economics, doctorate in finance, etc., etc. And they'll basically just put together data all day, and throw together the numbers and for their region. And then as the Federal Reserve, as an entire body, they'll make these decisions as far as where interest rates should go and things like that. It's completely centrally planned at all levels. So instead of allowing the market to say, hey, what are interest rates? Like, I don't know, if I need to see 10% personally, like if I'm gonna put it in a savings bond or whatever, like I need to see a high interest rates. But you might be not about borrowing at 10%. You might be like, yo, I'm gonna borrow at 7%. And then the market just works that out. How much capital is there to save and lend? How much is there that wants to be lent? And so by having a central bank that does this on our behalf and can basically artificially lower the interest rates to 0%, which is where they're at, and then will not raise them as they are tapering their asset purchases, which is insane. I mean, think about this. They're literally printing currency and buying assets. Like, they're just buying America. And then, at a time of their choosing, they will jack those interest rates way up, and everything will come way down once they have their position made, and then we'll enter into a new agreement with our government overlords, and or you'll see a revolution-like thing happening in North America. I think it's going to be more of a transition to crypto assets. I've gotten comments on this channel. People are like, it feels fake to me. Da, da. It's like, what are your options, dudes? Like, what's fake is printing up fake currency and then buying up assets at the Federal Reserve level. Like, it's insane. So now, because they're doing this at such a rapid pace, because we're getting closer to the peak part of the fourth turning, typically you get some sort of peak crisis. We're not there yet. We're just having a bunch of little micro baby crises. At that point in time, because we're on that 250-year revolutionary cycle, we're due for this. It's possible that the crypto space could become the new financial space, and everything in the old world of finance just kind of ceases to exist. That is to say that the American public says, no, we really don't want to deal with these dollars anymore. We'll gladly accept Dogecoin or Bitcoin or Monero or whatever. And you could see this moment where the Federal Reserve has no power if we stop using their crap fake currency. The average normie doesn't believe in that yet. They're loving their stimmy checks. They're starting to understand that the stimmy checks are a lot more expensive than initially thought. now you're paying more for your fuel, you're paying more for your food, paying more for housing. It's great if you own assets. If you own assets, you're loving this because everything continues to pump, except for gold and silver, which if you own gold and silver, you're loving this because you're able to pump assets, sell other assets that are inflating, and buy more gold and silver. I'm freaking loving it, personally. But we have this entity that can literally print currency and buy assets. It's insane. And the conversation right now is like, well, when will you taper your asset purchases? Meaning, we're gonna purchase something less than $150 billion a month in assets. That's 150,000 million dollars. That's what a billion. A billion is 1,000 million. It's just insane. It's basically better to say we're doing 15% of $1 trillion a month in asset purchases to keep the market up. Because if the Federal Reserve doesn't do that, the market will fall. And if the market falls, then the baby boomers have nothing in retirement, and then all asset prices fall, which means everyone who has debt on those assets, they default on the debt, which means that the assets fall even more, and it gets really gnarly, and you get into a Great Depression-like moment, which is gonna happen, in my opinion, anyway. It's just, is it gonna happen this year? Is it gonna happen next year? Is it gonna happen 5 years from now? I don't think we're gonna be able to say over the next 10 or 15 years that we pulled like a Japan on this, and like we just had like a depression for 30 years, but it wasn't that severe, which is essentially like best case scenario. We have no economic growth, the baby boomers just kind of die out, and then, you know, assets never really go anywhere, they just kind of maintain. Which is impossible because the demographics are such where there are more people selling assets year after year than buying assets because the baby boomers outnumber the millennials like greatly. So this trend is just literally going to continue. And it's super alarming that the average person has no idea how the Federal Reserve System or the monetary system in North America works. Like, what keeps the value of a dollar going? And the reality of it is the U.S. military. The fact that we say it's worth something. But we're seeing them lose war after war at this point, COVID and the Taliban. And we now realize, like with Taiwan and Ukraine, that they ain't got this. And so the value of the US dollar will find its intrinsic value of zero at some point in time. The reality of it is they're destroying your purchasing power by 10 to 15%. Depends on how you measure it and what you buy. But it's insane to me that it's like, no, we're gonna destroy 2% of the purchasing power. That's our goal. And everyone's like, oh, okay, that's cool. It's like, man, one thing I'm just thinking through, currency is consistent in the short term, meaning it inflates or deflates 3, 10, 15% a year. But in the long term, it's always falling in value. Always falling in value. Cryptocurrencies are very inconsistent in the short term. I mean, up, down, 30%, 50%, here to there, all day. But in the long term, to date, they're always rising in value. So there's this cross sections, like this crossroad, where it's like, do you want to hold cryptocurrency or do you want to hold government fiat currency? And it depends on what your timeline is. If your timeline is 1 week, government fiat will probably do. If your timeline is 1 year or longer, I don't think government fiat will do. I just don't. If it's more than a year or two, it's not gonna do. You're much better off going into a crypto or hard asset or whatever it is that you like. But this game is gonna end so bad.